Hey everyone, Shaun Stevenson here, author of the Throne series, and it is old school April time! It is the month of April now. March is over. We are into April, but even though we're in old school April, which is a readathon, watchathon, do-a-thon, and I will have a link down in the description below that you can check out for more info about that. And I've got all my books up on the shelves that well, not these ones, I mean, I wrote those. But all these other ones that are up on these shelves here and here are all the books I'm reading for old school April, or at least hope to read. They're a hope to read list. But I want to talk first, though. We got to wrap up the book of March. The book of March. We got to wrap up the month of March because I read a lot of fun books. Now, I will say I read a ton of picture books and board books in March because I am a children's pastor, and so Easter was on March 31st this year. And so I had to go back, and I usually go and try to find books for our preschool rooms at church. So I read a ton of preschool board books and picture books. And so I'm actually not really going to talk about those because they would take up a long time. There were 10 of them. So I don't really want to go into all of those. There were a lot of them. I have some thoughts about some of them because I didn't love them all because sometimes they have weird stuff. And plus one of them, I swear this one picture book was written by AI. The way it was written, I just kept reading it thinking, did AI write this? Because it's run-on sentences. There was no punctuation. It just kind of kept going and going and going. And then it had multiple ways to talk about the same topic, but not in a preschool book kind of way, where it's rephrasing something to kind of help get a point across. This was literally here's one way to describe this. And then a few pages later, totally unrelated, here's another way to describe this. And I thought, this is really strange structure, and I don't really know what's going on, except that this book must have been written by AI. It's the only thing I can think of. So, I'm going to talk about all of the longer books I read, middle grade and up, because I think those are probably more interesting anyway. So, unless now you're probably intrigued by what was this AI book you read. Anyways, the first book I read was a great start to the month of March, and that was Goosebumps, House of Shivers, Book 2, Goblin Monday by R.L. Stine. This was a fun book, but it had so many plot holes. The more I thought about it, the more I realized, wow, this book has so many plot holes going on, and I can't even figure out how to close the loop here, because it just, so many things that could have been different. And in one sense, though, it still was fun. So it was complicated, but I have a whole review of this book and a spoiler-filled Let's Discuss video of this book, so definitely go check those out if you want to hear more about Goblin Monday. The next book I read was Nemesis and the Lost Vault of Time by P.J. Davis, and this was such a fun book. It is definitely up there for one of my favorite reads so far this year. It had so many fun characters, fun predicaments the characters were in. It had a National Treasure vibe along with the fantasy vibe and a little bit of Dante's Inferno vibe. It was everything. It was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. And definitely, I will say, PJ Davis commented on my review of his book that I have on my channel, and he did say the last picture in the book is a hint for what might be to come. And that got me super excited because it could be really interesting what's next. I thought that was really fun. So definitely check that book out. It just came out last month. It's a brand new book, just like Goblin Monday is a brand new book. So two brand new books to start off the month of March. That's a lot of fun. And then the next book I read is now my favorite Goosebumps book of all time. This was such a good Goosebumps book. It is Goosebumps Series 2000, Cry of the Cat by R.L. Stine, book number 1 in Series 2000. I loved this book. It had everything I wanted in a Goosebumps book. I have a review of this up on the channel, so definitely go check that out if you haven't yet. But I just really enjoyed it. It had a great atmosphere. It had great set pieces. It had a great sequence near the end that was so creepy. And I will say, I recently rewatched the Goosebumps TV show episode of this book, and it It was really good. I think that they actually did some great work in updating the script for a TV format, and I think that the changes they made were really good. I actually kind of liked some of the changes a tiny bit better than the book. So I thought that was really well done. So definitely check out this book. If you have not read this one, put it on your TBR because it was a great Goosebumps book. The next two books I read were two books in the Sea Squirrels series. Number one, Squirreled Away, and number two, Boy Meets Squirrels, both by Mike Naraki. Now these books are kind of in the vein of like a Dave Pilkey kind of book where there's a lot of pictures, or an Agents of Suit kind of book. There's lots of pictures in here. There's a lot of, there's a lot of different page styles, like the whole page is black and then the text is white all of a sudden when they're in the cave, which was a lot of fun. They did a lot of fun things, and the illustrations really reminded me a lot of Gravity Falls the entire time I was reading it. So these were fun, but I will say they kind of just blend into each other. Like there's not a lot of resolve in the storylines. So these books just kind of flow into each other over and over and over again. So I did find that a little bit off-putting because while I like a series with continuing plot lines, this was like there was no resolve in the first or second book. It just keeps going. And it's almost like it's a part of a larger book, like Act 1 of a 4-part book. So I didn't really love that style, but I know this is great for a lot of reluctant readers. So, and there's some good humor. I definitely laughed out loud a couple of times. So definitely check these out. If you have a kid who likes to read these kinds of books, these are fun. I thought they were entertaining. They definitely are not very historically accurate, but that's fine. It's talking squirrels that were dehydrated from the Dead Sea and lost in a cave. So what are you going to do? The next book I read is probably the most potentially problematic book I read this month, and that was The Secret of the Planet Macon, Daystar Voyages, book number 1 by Gilbert Morris and Dan Meeks. And I have a review of this up on the channel, but just suffice it to say, this book, I still don't know about what's happening in this book, because there's definitely a burgeoning love story between the captain of the ship and one of the new crew members, and I don't know how old the new crew member really is. There's just no actual definitive statement about how old she is, and the captain, it definitely says, is like 24, 25. So, this book was kind of problematic. But like I said, it doesn't actually say. It just says that she's older than some other teenagers who are also part of the new crew. So, yeah, this was an interesting one. I don't think I can recommend, really. The next book I read was book number 3 in the Sea Squirrels, Nutty Study Buddies. Which, okay, this is how wild this series gets. In this particular book, the squirrels go to the roller skating rink and are like roller skating around the roller rink during the couple song, and I just was like, what is even happening in this book? Also, there is a evil cat named Mr. Nemesis who is maybe can talk, I don't know, but this book is just wild, and again, doesn't really resolve. It just kind of continues, although it does pick up random threads from the first book that weren't talked about at all in the second book, but now they're back in the third book. So you got to read these like back to back to back. Otherwise, I feel like they're too confusing to follow. It's just too complicated to follow otherwise, and that's sounds a little odd coming from a book series that is definitely very simple on one hand. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I'll keep reading these or not. They're so easy to read. They take like 20 minutes to read. So I might go check out some more from the library. I checked out all 3 of those from the library. So I might go check out some more from the library, but we'll see. So the next book I read was The Spell by Bill Myers, book number 3 in the Forbidden Doors series. And this book, this was a little complicated because on one hand, I really enjoyed the storyline of this book. It's about a coven who casts a spell on Becca, the main character, and things are going wrong in her life, and she is wondering, does this spell have control over my life now? And can I escape from this? Is there a way out? And I will say this is a Christian book series. And throughout these books, the main characters are battling demons in their hometown of Crescent Bay, California. It's very interesting and wild to reread these books. But this book in particular had some interesting theological takes that I personally don't agree with, even though I am a Christian and I'm a children's pastor. But this book takes what's called a more fundamentalist route in theology. Now, I'm not going to get super in the weeds of theology here because there's a lot of different ways to talk about theology and different things, and it can get real complicated real fast. What I will just say here is this book really starts from a perspective of God as a judge who is just out to zap people for the bad things they do. And that is just not my personal perspective of who God is. I think the Bible clearly tells us that God is love. In 1 John chapter 4, it says God is love, just straight up, period. So I think that God loves people and cares about people. And I think that God cares about what's wrong in the world, that there are a lot of broken things in our world. We have a lot of issues throughout the world across with wars and the ways people treat each other that I personally don't think are right, the way some people treat others. I just don't think is loving. I go back to what Jesus said in the book of Matthew when he said that, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and also love each other as you love yourself, as you love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that those are the two things that get boiled down to the ways that Christians are supposed to behave in the world. And unfortunately, there are a lot of Christians in the world who don't behave that way and do decide to be more of a judge of people instead of leaving that to God and saying, you know what? I'm not someone's judge. I am not going to come and just yell at people and tell people these bad things they do are bad. I am a person who is called to love others, be kind to others, and to share the love of God with other people. That's what I believe. I believe that there is evil in the world and that one day God is going to make things right, especially for those who have been oppressed and people who have been, in situations where they're faced bad things and evil things. God one day will make it right, I think. That's my personal opinion about it. So I come from that perspective, starting with God's love, not starting with God's judgment and blasting people, because I don't think that is who God is. God is not going to just looking around being who am I going to get today? That's not who God is. That's not how God operates. So at least as far as I believe. So this book was interesting. It was complicated. I have a lot of complicated thoughts about it. I might do a Let's Discuss video of this just so I could go into all the weeds of, here's how this book is talking about this and that. But for now, that's where I'll leave this. It was entertaining, and the storyline was a lot of fun and really well done and really suspenseful and kind of scary. But some of those theology points I was not really tracking with the way that this book talked about them. And speaking of other interesting books with interesting theology, I also read book number 6 in the Seven Sleeper series, Empress of the Underworld by Gilbert Morris. Gilbert Morris, at it again. He's the one who also wrote that Secret of the Planet Macon. So, okay, this book series, I read books 1 through 5 4 years ago, and I really enjoyed the storyline in those. But now I'm at book 6, and I didn't have this one for a long time, and I finally decided, you know what? I'm just going to order it. I'm going to get it off Thrift Books because I haven't seen it in the wild. I've been searching and searching and searching. So I just went ahead and got it. And I read it. And this book, book number 6, is a lot of people feel who have read this whole series, this is the weakest book in the series, and I would probably agree. So far, even though this book really mixed it up a lot and had a very different take on a lot of things, this book is a redux of The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia. It's The Silver Chair all over again because it's the same kind of plot, same kind of villain, same kind of characters that are going through the motions here. And I just thought, were you reading The Silver Chair when you wrote this? Because this is just like The Silver Chair. This book also, I'll do a review of this book, but it has some interesting things to say about beauty and the way that people view one another, which I think is a little problematic in the way that they talk about it. And also in this book, there's some weird discussion of other characters without them there that I thought, wow, this is super gossipy. I don't know. It was a little odd. So, anyways, I don't know if I liked this one. I will say, I read it. It was a book I read. The next book I read was a really great one, and I really enjoyed this one, even though I know some people don't love this one, but I loved it. It was R.L. Stine's Ghosts of Fear Street, book number 7, Fright Night. I really enjoyed this book. I think this book was a lot of fun. It's very different from the other Ghosts of Fear Street books I've read so far, in that it has like kind of a fantasy element to it, but I love fantasy. So I really liked this. I think it was a lot of fun. There was one twist that like halfway through I was like, oh, I know what's going on. And lo and behold, that is what happened. But this book was a lot of fun. It had some really great sequences, especially if you love, here's the deal. If you love stopping at like those Ripley's Believe It or Not, or any of those sorts of like wax museums, like weird little side museums like that, if you love that kind of thing, you will probably like this book because it's set in a like history mystery museum. And this book is also interesting. I have a lot of things to say about this book because I think there is something deeper going on in this book. And I actually also just have to shout out that I really liked the brother-sister duo in this book. I think they were great characters who are a lot of fun to follow throughout this storyline. So, Fright Night, I had a great time reading this book. And then the last book I read in the month of March, well, I finished it up. I've been reading it since February 14th. It was a book for the season of Lent. Lent is a season in the Christian calendar where people kind of take a time to like reflect and be like kind of a little bit somber and like thinking about like their lives and like where are they at and like how can they grow as a person and those sorts of things. And so that's the season of Lent. It's between Ash Wednesday, which this year was on Valentine's Day, February 14th, all the way through Easter Sunday. And so this was a devotional book kind of thing that I read called Abide With Us, a Lenten Journey with the Saints. And I gotta say, I didn't really love this book. While it did have some amazing like quotes throughout it, it's kind of set up in a way where there are these quotes from different people throughout history, different Christians who have thought about God and thought about who God is. And so that was interesting to read, like a lot of the different people that were quoted here. But sometimes there were discussion questions and like journal questions. The journal questions were not that great, so I didn't really love it, just gonna say. But I thought that some of the quotes from other parts of the book were really good and really thought-provoking. And I really love reading about history and people in history. I'm a big fan of reading about just different Christians throughout history and the ways that they write about God and their place in the world and those sorts of things. So this was interesting on that level and was my nonfiction book of the month. So that is mostly all the books I read because like I said, I read a bunch of picture books and board books too, but I didn't want to go into all the weeds of those because we'd be here all day if we did. So those are the books I read in the month of March. It was a fun month. I read a lot of fun books, read some problematic books, but hey, it's okay. So I'm excited though for Old School April. Like there's so many fun books I have up on my shelves that I'm going to be reading and I can't wait to dive into them. So join me in Old School April if you think about it and you want to join this readathon, watchathon, do-a-thon. Even if you're not really a book reader and you're a book lurker, you could join by doing some of the watching prompts. And it's not just about a certain kind of genre. It can like kind of flex into any sort of genre, which is really awesome, I think. So definitely check that out in the description below. And until next time, everybody, keep reading. Bye!